I walked into my childhood home that Tuesday evening expecting birthday cake and warm hugs for my 22nd birthday. Instead, I found my parents and sister Madison sitting around our dining room table with expressions that could freeze summer rain. Dad cleared his throat and delivered words that shattered my world completely. "We sold your Honda Civic and cashed out your entire college fund to cover Madison's gambling debts. Your sister deserves a fresh start more than you deserve an education." He slid a loan agreement across our wooden table toward me, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. "Either co-sign her $30,000 debt right now, or pack your belongings and leave this house forever tonight." The silence that followed felt heavier than Texas humidity in August. I stared at the papers, my mind racing to comprehend how my own family could orchestrate such calculated destruction on what should have been a celebration. Madison sat there twirling her blonde hair around her finger, the same nervous habit she'd developed as a child whenever she broke something valuable and waited for someone else to clean up her mess. Mom finally spoke through tears that seemed genuine but felt rehearsed. "Honey, Madison has been struggling with some serious problems. She got involved with online poker games about 18 months ago, and things spiraled out of control very quickly. We didn't know how to tell you because we kept thinking we could fix everything quietly without involving you in the drama." Dad leaned forward, his weathered face showing exhaustion that aged him beyond his 58 years. "Your sister accumulated over $75,000 in gambling debts across multiple credit cards and private lenders. Some of these people aren't the kind you can negotiate payment plans with, Brianna. They've been calling our house, showing up at Madison's apartment, making threats that scared us into immediate action." I felt my stomach drop as the full scope of their deception became clear. "You've known about this for 18 months and never once thought to warn me that my future was being used as collateral for her mistakes." My voice cracked despite my efforts to maintain composure. "What exactly did you sell, and how much of my college fund remains?" Madison finally looked up from her manicured nails, her green eyes holding not shame, but something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "Actually, there's nothing left in your education account. We needed every penny to keep certain individuals from involving law enforcement or taking more drastic measures to collect what Madison owed them." The room began spinning as I processed this information. My grandparents had started that college fund when I was born, contributing faithfully every birthday and Christmas for 22 years. I had watched it grow to $45,000, enough to cover most of my tuition at any state university in Texas. My Honda Civic had been my high school graduation gift, purchased with money I earned working summers at the local veterinary clinic. "But wait," I said slowly, my legal mind beginning to function despite the emotional chaos swirling through my chest. "You can't access my college fund without my signature. That account required both our names on any withdrawal over $500. How did you manage to liquidate everything without my authorization or knowledge?" Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, refusing to meet my gaze directly. "We found a way to handle the paperwork requirements. Madison needed help immediately, and we couldn't wait for you to come home from your semester abroad to discuss financial options." The realization hit me like cold water. "You forged my signature on legal documents. You committed fraud using my identity to steal money that belonged to me." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against our hardwood floor, with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. Madison laughed, a sound that held no humor whatsoever. "Oh, please don't be so dramatic about this whole situation. You've always had everything handed to you on a silver platter while I struggled with real problems and actual challenges. Your precious college fund was just sitting there earning tiny interest rates when it could be used to solve a genuine crisis that threatened our family's safety and reputation. I stared at my sister, seeing her clearly, for perhaps the first time in my adult life. Her entitlement wasn't new, but the calculated coldness behind her words revealed something darker than simple selfishness. She had orchestrated this entire scenario, manipulating our parents' fear and love to destroy my future while positioning herself as the victim deserving rescue. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue that looked suspiciously dry. Madison threatened to hurt herself if we didn't find a way to pay her debts quickly. She said she would rather die than face the consequences of her gambling addiction. We couldn't lose our daughter, Brianna. Surely you can understand that we had to choose her immediate safety over your educational timeline. The emotional manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Madison had never shown suicidal tendencies in her entire 25 years of life. She had, however, perfected the art of manufacturing crises that required other people's sacrifices to resolve. Our parents had fallen for her performance because they wanted to believe they were saving their troubled child rather than enabling her destructive behavior. Dad opened a manila folder filled with bills and legal documents. Here's the complete financial picture we're dealing with right now. Madison owes $37,000 to various credit card companies, $18,000 to a private lending company in Dallas, and another $22,000 to individuals whose collection methods fall outside traditional banking practices. We've already paid off the most dangerous creditors using your college fund and car sale proceeds. I picked up one of the bills noting Madison's signature on applications for credit cards I'd never heard of before. When did you accumulate all of this debt? These applications are dated over the past 2 years, which means you were gambling heavily while I was working double shifts to save money for graduate school applications. Madison shrugged with infuriating casualness. I had some bad luck with investments and tried to recover my losses through online gaming platforms. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to improve your financial situation quickly. Not everyone can be satisfied with slow, boring progress like you apparently prefer. But this isn't your money we're talking about, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You gambled away funds that belonged to our family, then convinced our parents to steal my future to cover your mistakes. How is any of this justified in your mind? Before Madison could respond, I heard a noise from our front window and realized our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was standing in her yard, clearly listening to our heated conversation through the thin walls of our suburban ranch house. The entire neighborhood would know about our family drama by morning, adding public humiliation to the personal betrayal I was experiencing. Dad noticed my glance toward the window and lowered his voice. We need to resolve this situation tonight, Brianna. The remaining $30,000 must be addressed through the loan agreement, or Madison could face serious legal consequences that would destroy her entire future. We're asking you to co-sign because your credit score and employment history make approval possible. I looked at the loan papers more carefully, noting the interest rate of 28% and monthly payments that would consume most of my income for the next 7 years. Signing this document would essentially guarantee my financial servitude to pay for Madison's gambling addiction while she faced no consequences for her choices. Then I noticed something else that made my blood run cold. Wait a minute. This application lists my social security number and employment information. How did you obtain my personal financial data without my permission? Madison's satisfied smirk finally slipped slightly. We needed to complete the preliminary paperwork to expedite the approval process once you agreed to help solve this family emergency. I realized with growing horror that my identity had been compromised far beyond the college fund theft. They had accessed my personal information, potentially damaging my credit rating and legal standing without my knowledge or consent. the betrayal extended deeper than money into fundamental violations of trust and legal boundaries that could affect my life for decades. As I stood there processing the magnitude of what my family had done, I heard Madison whisper something to Dad that made my decision crystal clear. She said with unmistakable glee, "I told you she'd cave eventually. She never could stand disappointing Mommy and Daddy when we really needed something important." But Madison had made one crucial error in her calculations. She had underestimated exactly how much disappointment I could withstand when my entire future hung in the balance. The game she thought she was winning was about to change in ways she never anticipated. Dad glanced at his watch, the same silver Timex he'd worn since before I was born. "You have exactly 2 hours to make your decision, Brianna. The loan office closes at 8 o'clock tonight, and we need your signature on these documents before then if we're going to prevent Madison from facing criminal charges tomorrow morning." I felt my world tilting off its axis as the artificial deadline pressured me into a choice that would define my adult life. 2 hours to decide whether to sacrifice my financial freedom for my sister's gambling addiction or lose my family forever by refusing to enable her destructive behavior. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need some time alone to think through all the implications of this decision. I'll go upstairs and review the paperwork carefully before giving you my final answer." Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand with fingers that felt ice cold despite the warm evening. "We know this is a lot to ask, sweetheart, but family takes care of family, especially during the most difficult times. Madison made some terrible mistakes, but she's still our daughter and your sister." I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom, noting how everything remained exactly as I'd left it when I moved out for college 4 years earlier. My high school track medals still hung on the wall beside photographs of friends who had moved across the country for better opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on me that my room had been preserved like a shrine, while my future was being auctioned off to pay for Madison's selfishness. I sat on my twin bed and pretended to read through the loan documents while actually planning my next moves. If my family wanted to play games with my life, I needed to understand the complete rules they were operating under. Something about Madison's confident attitude suggested this betrayal involved more than gambling debts and forged signatures. After 20 minutes of fake deliberation, I told my parents I needed to pack some clothes regardless of my decision, since I would either be moving out immediately or needing professional attire for the additional jobs I'd require to make loan payments. They accepted this explanation and returned to their worried conference in the kitchen. I quietly opened Madison's bedroom door and began searching through her belongings for evidence of her financial activities. Her room looked like a tornado had swept through it, with clothes scattered across every surface and empty energy drink cans stacked on her nightstand. But underneath the deliberate chaos, I found a metal box hidden beneath her mattress. Inside the box, my blood ran cold as I discovered documents that revealed the true scope of Madison's criminal behavior. She had filed false insurance claims for 3 separate car accidents that never occurred, collecting over $12,000 in fraudulent payouts. She had stolen mail from at least 6 neighbors using their personal information to open credit accounts and order merchandise that she sold online. But the discovery that made my hands shake was a stack of unopened letters addressed to me from universities across the country. Madison had been intercepting my mail for months, stealing correspondence that contained scholarship offers and acceptance letters I had never received. The top letter was from Northwestern University, offering me a full academic scholarship worth over $200,000 over 4 years. I photographed everything with my cell phone, documenting evidence of mail theft, insurance fraud, and identity theft that represented federal crimes carrying serious prison sentences. Madison hadn't just made bad gambling decisions. She had been operating a systematic criminal enterprise using our family's address and information as cover for her illegal activities. A noise from downstairs made me freeze, and I heard unfamiliar voices mixing with my parents' conversation. I carefully crept to the top of the staircase and peered down to see a man I'd never met before standing in our living room. He was tall and heavily tattooed, wearing clothes that suggested he wasn't here for a social visit. Madison's voice carried up the stairs as she introduced him. "Mom, Dad, this is Derek. He's been helping me work through some of my financial challenges, and he wanted to meet you both since we're getting serious about our relationship." Derek's presence immediately changed the atmosphere in our house. His cold eyes scanned our family photos and furniture like he was calculating their resale value. When he spoke, his words carried an underlying threat that made my parents visibly uncomfortable. "Madison tells me you folks are handling her debt situation tonight. That's smart thinking because some of the people she owes money to aren't as patient as I am. They prefer more direct collection methods when borrowers don't meet their payment schedules on time." I realized Derek wasn't just Madison's boyfriend. He was likely connected to the dangerous creditors my parents feared. Madison had brought a criminal into our family home to intimidate our parents into pressuring me to sign the loan documents. The manipulation had layers I was still uncovering. Dad's voice sounded strained as he tried to maintain authority in his own house. "We're working on a solution that will satisfy everyone involved. Brianna just needs a little more time to review the paperwork before making her final decision." Derek laughed, a sound that held no warmth whatsoever. Time isn't something Madison has in unlimited supply. Certain individuals expect their money by tomorrow afternoon, or they'll start exploring alternative recovery methods that nobody wants to experience. From my position on the stairs, I watched Derek walk around our living room, touching our family belongings in a way that felt like marking territory. He picked up a framed photograph of my high school graduation and studied it with interest that made my skin crawl. "This must be the sister who's going to solve everyone's problems tonight," he said, holding my picture up for Madison to see. "She looks like a smart girl who understands family loyalty and the importance of keeping promises." Madison giggled in a way that sounded forced and nervous. "Oh, Brianna always comes through when the family really needs her. She's never been able to say no when someone she loves asks for help." But Derek's next words revealed why Madison was so confident about my compliance. He set my graduation photo back on the mantel and turned to face my parents directly. "It would be unfortunate if Brianna decided not to cooperate tonight." Madison has shared some interesting stories about her sister's college activities and weekend trips. Some people might find those details very interesting, especially future employers who value certain types of moral character. My mind raced as I tried to understand what leverage Derek thought he had over me. I had lived a relatively quiet college life, focusing on academics and part-time work rather than partying or risky behavior. But then I remembered Madison's access to my personal information and realized she could have fabricated compromising stories or evidence to use against me. Mom's voice sounded small and frightened as she spoke to Derek. "We're a respectable family who pays our debts and honors our commitments. There's no need for any threats or unpleasantness here tonight." Derek smiled in a way that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Of course not, Mrs. Johnson. I'm just here to make sure everyone understands the importance of resolving this situation quickly and completely. Madison's family seems like good people who want to do the right thing." I crept back to Madison's room and continued searching through her belongings, now looking specifically for evidence of what Derek might use to blackmail me. In her laptop computer, I found edited photographs that made it appear I was drinking heavily at parties I'd never attended. She had created fake social media accounts using my name and photographs, posting content designed to damage my reputation and future job prospects. But the most disturbing discovery was a folder on her desktop labeled Insurance Claims that contained detailed plans for staging accidents involving my car and person. Madison had researched how to create convincing injuries and property damage that would generate insurance payouts she could access through forged documentation. The scope of her criminal planning extended far beyond gambling debts into insurance fraud, identity theft, and potentially physical harm to me personally. She had been systematically destroying my life while building her criminal enterprise, using our family's love and trust as weapons against everyone who cared about her. I heard Derek's voice getting louder downstairs, and the tone suggested his patience was wearing thin. If I was going to escape this trap, I needed to act quickly and strategically. Madison had underestimated my ability to investigate her activities, but she had also given me the evidence I needed to turn the tables on her completely. I quietly gathered copies of all the incriminating documents and photographs, storing them on a flash drive that I hid in my jacket pocket. Whatever decision I made about the loan papers, I now had proof of federal crimes that would send Madison to prison for years and likely implicate Derek in her criminal activities. But first, I needed to make one crucial phone call to confirm my suspicions about how deep this conspiracy actually went. I dialed the number for our family's mail carrier, Jim Morrison, who had delivered to our neighborhood for over 15 years and knew our family personally. Jim answered on the second ring, and his voice immediately confirmed my worst fears. "Oh, hey, Brianna. I was wondering when someone might call about the mail situation. I've been trying to deliver some important-looking letters to you for months, but Madison keeps intercepting them at the mailbox. She said you'd moved temporarily and asked her to collect your correspondence, but something about her story never felt right to me." My hands shook as I realized Madison had been systematically stealing my mail for nearly 6 months, intercepting not just college correspondence, but potentially credit reports, job offers, and other life-changing documents. The federal crime of mail theft carried serious penalties, especially when combined with the identity theft and fraud I'd already discovered. Jim continued talking, his concern evident in his voice. Some of those letters looked like they came from pretty prestigious universities and scholarship foundations. I kept thinking I should double-check with your parents, but Madison always seemed to be waiting by the mailbox whenever I arrived with deliveries addressed to you. I thanked Jim and promised to contact postal authorities about the mail theft, then hung up and sat in Madison's room surrounded by evidence of crimes that would destroy her life completely if reported to law enforcement. The loan papers downstairs suddenly seemed like the least important issue facing our family tonight. But I also realized Derek's presence complicated everything. If Madison was involved with criminals who used violence to collect debts, simply exposing her crimes might put our entire family in danger. I needed a plan that would protect my parents while ensuring Madison faced consequences for her actions without triggering retaliation from Derek's associates. As I sat there processing everything I'd learned, I heard Derek's voice carrying up the stairs with a tone that made my blood freeze. Maybe I should go upstairs and have a personal conversation with Brianna about the importance of family cooperation. Sometimes these decisions become clearer when discussed face to face. I realized my time for investigation was over, and whatever plan I developed would need to be implemented immediately. Derek was coming upstairs, and I had no intention of being alone with him when he arrived. Madison's criminal enterprise was about to encounter someone who understood exactly how to dismantle it completely. I heard Derek's heavy footsteps on our wooden staircase and quickly shoved Madison's criminal evidence back into its hiding places. My mind raced through options as I realized I was trapped in her bedroom with a potentially dangerous man approaching, and my family downstairs completely unaware of the true scope of what they'd gotten involved in. But before Derek reached the top of the stairs, Madison's voice called out sharply from the living room. "Derek, honey, come back down here. Brianna needs privacy to make her decision, and we should respect that. She'll come down when she's ready to discuss everything with the family." I heard his footsteps pause, then reluctantly retreat back downstairs. Madison's intervention surprised me until I realized she probably wanted to maintain control over the situation without Derek's unpredictable behavior potentially scaring me into calling the police immediately. I used this reprieve to begin implementing a plan that had formed while reviewing Madison's criminal activities. If my family wanted to play games with my future, I would show them exactly what happened when someone with a criminal justice education and analytical mind decided to fight back strategically. My first call was to Northwestern University's financial aid office, using the phone number from the stolen letter. The office was closed for the day, but their voicemail system allowed me to leave detailed messages for specific counselors. I explained that I had not received their scholarship notification due to mail theft and requested emergency consideration for late acceptance of their full tuition offer. Next, I called our family's lawyer, Margaret Walsh, who had handled our grandmother's estate and other legal matters for over 20 years. Margaret answered her home phone and immediately recognized the urgency in my voice when I explained I needed emergency legal consultation about identity theft and fraud committed by family members. "Brianna," she said, her voice heavy with concern, "these are very serious federal crimes you're describing. Mail theft alone carries penalties of up to 5 years in prison, and the financial fraud could add significant additional sentences. Are you certain about these allegations against Madison?" I described the evidence I'd found and photographed, including the forged signatures, stolen scholarship letters, and fraudulent insurance claims. Margaret listened carefully occasionally, asking clarifying questions that revealed her growing alarm about the legal implications. "You need to contact law enforcement immediately," she said firmly. "But given the family dynamics and potential safety concerns you've mentioned, I recommend calling Detective Sarah Williams at the Dallas Police Department. She specializes in financial fraud cases and has experience handling situations where family members are both victims and perpetrators." I thanked Margaret and called Detective Williams, reaching her directly despite the late hour. She listened to my summary of Madison's criminal activities with the kind of focused attention that suggested this wasn't her first case involving gambling addiction and family financial abuse. "The evidence you're describing could support multiple felony charges," Detective Williams said. "But prosecuting family members requires careful consideration of witness cooperation and potential retaliation. Are you prepared to testify against your sister if this moves forward to criminal charges?" I looked around Madison's room, thinking about the months of lies and systematic destruction of my future, and felt my resolve harden into something unbreakable. "Yes," I said. "She's committed crimes that have destroyed my educational opportunities and threatened our family's financial stability. Someone has to hold her accountable for these choices." Detective Williams explained the process for filing formal complaints and collecting evidence that would meet legal standards for prosecution. She also warned me about the potential for Derek's associates to retaliate if they perceived Madison's arrest as a threat to their own operations. "One more thing," she said before ending our conversation. "You mentioned Derek seemed familiar with debt collection and intimidation. Can you describe his appearance and any identifying marks or tattoos you noticed?" I described Derek's appearance and the tattoos I'd observed on his arms, including what looked like gang-related symbols. Detective Williams promised to run his description through their database and contact me if they found matching criminal records. My next call was to my college friend Emma Rodriguez, who lived in Austin and had offered me a place to stay if I ever needed to leave Dallas quickly. Emma answered immediately and didn't ask questions when I explained I needed emergency accommodation while dealing with a family crisis. "Of course you can stay here," she said. "My apartment has a guest room and you can stay as long as you need while sorting everything out. Do you need me to drive to Dallas tonight to help you move your belongings?" I thanked Emma and promised to call her with travel details once I finalized my plans for leaving. Having a safe place to stay would give me the freedom to take actions that might anger my family without worrying about immediate homelessness. But before I could leave Dallas, I needed to ensure my parents understood the true nature of what Madison had involved them in. They deserved to know they were potentially facing criminal charges for the fraud they'd committed, even if they'd been manipulated into participating. I called our bank and spoke with the night customer service representative about the unauthorized access to my college fund. The representative confirmed that withdrawal activity had occurred using forged signatures and promised to flag the account for investigation by their fraud department. Then I contacted the Internal Revenue Service fraud hotline and reported Madison's use of family members' social security numbers for false tax returns and identity theft. The IRS representative explained that identity theft investigations could take months, but they would place protective holds on all affected accounts to prevent further fraudulent activity. My final preparation involved contacting Dr. Robert Chen, Dad's business partner, whose number I found in our family's address book. Dr. Chen sounded surprised to hear from me, but became very serious when I asked whether he'd noticed any unusual financial activity related to Dad's accounting or business operations. "Actually, I've been worried about some irregularities in our bookkeeping for several months," he admitted. "There have been discrepancies in our petty cash accounts and some unusual transactions that your father couldn't explain adequately." I was planning to suggest hiring an independent auditor to review our financial records. My stomach dropped as I realized Madison's criminal activities likely extended into Dad's business, potentially making him an unwitting accomplice to embezzlement or fraud that could destroy his professional reputation and livelihood. Dr. Chen continued, his voice filled with genuine concern. "Brianna, if you know something about these financial irregularities, I need to understand what's happening. Our business could be at serious legal risk if there's been fraudulent activity involving our accounts." I explained what I'd discovered about Madison's criminal enterprises and suggested Dr. Chen contact his attorney immediately to review all business financial records for unauthorized transactions. The scope of Madison's crimes was expanding beyond anything I'd initially imagined. As I sat there processing the magnitude of what my sister had done to our entire family, I heard voices downstairs becoming more agitated. Derek's tone was becoming sharper, and my parents sounded increasingly frightened. The artificial deadline for signing loan papers was approaching, and the pressure on everyone was building toward a confrontation I needed to control carefully. I opened my laptop and began drafting a detailed letter that would explain everything I'd discovered and provide my family with clear evidence of Madison's criminal activities. The letter would serve multiple purposes, documenting the crimes for law enforcement, protecting my parents from future manipulation, and ensuring Madison faced consequences for her actions regardless of what happened tonight. But the letter would also include one final twist that Madison had never anticipated. While researching her crimes, I discovered something about our grandmother's engagement ring that would change everything she thought she knew about our family's financial situation. The ring Madison had stolen and pawned months earlier was indeed valuable, but it wasn't our grandmother's original engagement ring. The real ring, worth approximately $50,000, had been placed in a safety deposit box years ago, with a high-quality replica left in our family's jewelry collection. Madison had stolen and sold a fake ring worth less than $200 while thinking she'd committed a major theft. But more importantly, the safety deposit box contained other items that our grandmother had left specifically for my education, including stock certificates and bonds that Madison had never discovered. The total value of these hidden assets was enough to replace everything she'd stolen and provide additional security for my future education and financial independence. Madison's crimes had been based on false assumptions about our family's resources and her own cleverness. She thought she'd destroyed my future while securing her own survival, but she'd actually stumbled into a trap that would expose her criminal behavior while revealing resources she'd never known existed. I finished drafting the letter and prepared copies of all the evidence I'd collected, organizing everything into packets that would be impossible for Madison to deny or explain away. The loan papers downstairs had become irrelevant because I was about to change the entire game in ways none of them could anticipate. But first, I needed to make one final phone call to ensure everything was legally documented properly. I contacted FBI agent Michael Torres, whose name Detective Williams had provided for federal crimes involving mail fraud and identity theft across state lines. Agent Torres listened to my evidence summary and confirmed that Madison's activities constituted multiple federal crimes requiring immediate investigation. He explained the process for filing formal complaints and warned me about potential retaliation from criminal associates like Derek. "The evidence you've described is substantial," he said, "but prosecuting these cases requires victims who are willing to testify and cooperate fully with federal investigators. Are you prepared for the personal and family consequences of pursuing federal charges against your sister?" I thought about the stolen scholarship opportunities, the forged signatures, the systematic destruction of my future, and the way Madison had smiled when she thought she'd won. "Yes," I said firmly. "She's made choices that require consequences, and someone has to ensure justice is served properly." Agent Torres promised to initiate an investigation immediately and provide protection for me if Derek's associates posed genuine threats to my safety. Having federal law enforcement involvement would prevent Madison from intimidating witnesses or destroying evidence once she realized the scope of what I'd discovered. As I prepared to go downstairs and face my family, I heard Derek's voice becoming increasingly aggressive in his demands for immediate resolution. The time for games and manipulation was ending, and Madison was about to discover that underestimating me had been the biggest mistake in her long history of poor decisions. I gathered my evidence packets, took a deep breath, and prepared to implement a plan that would deliver justice while protecting the people I loved from the consequences of Madison's criminal choices. The loan papers waiting downstairs were about to become the least of anyone's concerns. I walked downstairs carrying my laptop and a folder of documents, maintaining a calm expression that disguised the storm of emotions churning through my chest. Derek was pacing our living room like a caged animal, while Madison sat on our couch with her legs crossed, checking her phone with the casual confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. Dad looked up as I entered the room, his face showing the strain of trying to manage a situation that had spiraled far beyond his control. "Have you reached a decision about the loan papers, Brianna? We're running short on time, and everyone needs to know how we're moving forward tonight." I set my laptop on the coffee table and opened it to display the evidence I'd collected from Madison's room. "Before I sign anything, I think everyone should see what I discovered while reviewing the financial situation upstairs. Madison, would you like to explain these documents to our parents?" Madison's confident expression flickered slightly as she saw images of her criminal evidence displayed on my computer screen. "Those are private papers from my room. You had no right to go through my personal belongings without permission." But Derek moved closer to look at the laptop screen, and his demeanor shifted immediately when he recognized the insurance fraud documents and fake identification materials. His eyes narrowed as he studied the evidence, and I could see him calculating the legal implications for his own involvement in Madison's activities. "What exactly are we looking at here?" Mom asked, moving to stand behind me as I scrolled through photographs of forged documents, stolen mail, and fraudulent applications. I clicked on the first image showing one of Madison's fake insurance claims. "This is documentation of a car accident that never happened filed to collect $12,000 in fraudulent insurance payments." Madison created false police reports and medical records to support this claim. Madison jumped up from the couch, her face flushed with anger rather than shame. "You're completely misinterpreting those documents. I was exploring legal options for recovering losses from legitimate accidents that weren't properly documented initially. But I was just getting started." I clicked to the next image showing the stack of stolen scholarship letters addressed to me. These are college acceptance letters and scholarship offers that Madison intercepted from our mail for over 6 months. She prevented me from receiving opportunities worth more than $200,000 in educational funding. Dad stared at the screen in horror as the scope of Madison's deception became clear. "Madison, you told us Brianna hadn't received any scholarship offers this year. You said she was struggling academically and needed family financial support to continue her education." Madison's manipulation had layers I was still uncovering, but Derek's presence was making everyone nervous in ways that complicated my plan to expose her systematically. He was studying the evidence with professional interest that suggested he was evaluating his own legal exposure rather than supporting Madison emotionally. "I need to speak with Madison privately for a few minutes," I said, looking directly at my sister. "There are some things we should discuss before involving everyone else in details that might be embarrassing for her personally." Derek immediately objected to this suggestion. "No private conversations. Whatever needs to be said can be said in front of everyone here. We're all family now, and families don't keep secrets from each other." But Madison surprised everyone by agreeing to speak with me alone. She seemed to think she could manipulate me more effectively, without witnesses not realizing I was prepared to record our conversation for law enforcement purposes. We stepped onto our back patio where the evening air carried the scent of honeysuckle from Mom's garden. Madison immediately dropped her defensive attitude and tried to appeal to my emotions with the same techniques she'd used to manipulate our parents. "Look, I know this seems bad, but you don't understand the pressure I've been under for months. Derek's associates aren't people you can negotiate with or ask for payment extensions. They expect their money on schedule, or they start hurting people to encourage faster compliance." I started recording our conversation on my phone while maintaining eye contact that suggested I was listening sympathetically. "Tell me about the insurance fraud, Madison. How long have you been filing false claims, and how much money have you collected through fraudulent activities?" Madison hesitated, then seemed to decide that partial honesty might gain my cooperation. "I've filed maybe 4 or 5 claims over the past 2 years. Nothing major, just small amounts to cover gambling losses and Derek's expenses. Insurance companies expect some level of fraud, and they budget for these kinds of losses anyway." Her casual attitude toward criminal activity was breathtaking, but I needed her to admit to more specific crimes before ending our conversation. "What about the mail theft? How did you manage to intercept my correspondence without arousing suspicion from our family or neighbors?" Madison actually smiled as she described her methods, clearly proud of her cleverness. I told Jim, the mail carrier, that you'd moved temporarily and asked me to collect your letters. He's such a trusting old man that he never questioned my story or asked for verification. I've been collecting your mail for months, sorting through anything that looked important or valuable. I felt sick as Madison described violating my privacy and stealing opportunities that could have changed my life completely. But I needed one more crucial admission before implementing the final phase of my plan. "Tell me about Dad's business," I said quietly. "Dr. Chen mentioned some financial irregularities in their accounting. Have you been taking money from their company accounts?" Madison's expression shifted to something that looked almost like panic, and I realized this was the crime that worried her most. That's completely different from everything else. "Dad's business has been struggling for months, and I just borrowed small amounts to cover immediate expenses. I always planned to pay everything back once my financial situation stabilized." The admission confirmed my worst fears about the scope of Madison's criminal enterprise. She had been systematically stealing from our family, our neighbors' insurance companies, and Dad's business while positioning herself as a victim, deserving rescue and support. But Madison's next words revealed the depth of her manipulation and criminal planning. "Actually, there's something else you should know before you decide whether to help me tonight. I've been putting anxiety medication in your coffee for the past 3 weeks to keep you calm and cooperative during stressful conversations." My blood ran cold as I realized Madison had been drugging me without my knowledge or consent, potentially affecting my judgment and decision-making ability during crucial weeks when I was applying for jobs and scholarships. The violation felt even more personal than the financial crimes because it involved my physical autonomy and mental clarity. "What kind of medication?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while internally screaming at this new level of betrayal. "Just mild anti-anxiety pills that I get from Derek sometimes," Madison said casually. "Nothing dangerous, just enough to help you stay relaxed when we needed to discuss difficult family situations. You've seemed so much more agreeable lately, and I thought it was helping everyone communicate more effectively." The revelation that Madison had been systematically poisoning me while stealing my future made every interaction we'd had for weeks feel contaminated and false. Any doubts I might have had about pursuing criminal charges against her evaporated completely. But I needed to maintain my composure long enough to gather the final pieces of evidence that would ensure her prosecution. "There's one more thing I need to understand, Madison. You mentioned Derek has associates who use violence to collect debts. Are you involved in criminal activities that extend beyond gambling and fraud?" Madison glanced toward our house to ensure Derek couldn't hear our conversation, then leaned closer with an expression that combined fear and excitement. "Derek runs a network that handles debt collection, money laundering, and identity theft across multiple states. I've been helping him by providing access to family and neighbor information for credit fraud operations." The scope of Madison's criminal involvement was expanding beyond anything I'd imagined, but it also meant she'd admitted to federal crimes that carried serious prison sentences. My recorded conversation would provide prosecutors with everything they needed to build cases against both Madison and Derek. "I think I understand the situation now," I said, ending the recording and preparing to return inside. "Let me think about everything you've told me while I review the loan papers one final time." Madison seemed satisfied that her explanations had convinced me to cooperate with her demands. "I knew you'd understand once you heard the complete story. Family has to stick together, especially when outside pressures threaten everyone's safety and security." But as we walked back into the house, Madison had no idea that our conversation had sealed her fate and provided law enforcement with recorded confessions to multiple federal crimes. Derek was waiting in our living room, and his agitated pacing suggested his patience was completely exhausted. "Time's up," he announced as we entered. The loan office is closing in 30 minutes, and certain people expect confirmation that Madison's debt situation has been resolved tonight. What's your decision, Brianna? I looked at Derek Madison and my frightened parents, then made the announcement that would change everything. I've decided to sign the loan papers tonight. But first I need to pack some clothes and personal items since I'll probably be moving out, regardless of how this situation develops. Madison's triumphant smile was the last thing I saw as I headed upstairs to implement the final phase of a plan that would deliver justice while protecting the people I loved from the consequences of her criminal choices. I spent the next hour in my bedroom carefully crafting a letter that would serve as both confession and evidence, while simultaneously packing only the essentials I could carry in one suitcase. The letter needed to accomplish multiple objectives: expose Madison's crimes, protect my parents from further manipulation, and provide law enforcement with documented evidence of federal criminal activities. As I wrote, I could hear Derek's increasingly agitated voice downstairs, punctuated by Madison's attempts to calm him and my parents' worried whispers. The artificial deadline was creating exactly the kind of pressure Madison had counted on to force my compliance, but she had miscalculated my willingness to sacrifice family relationships for justice and personal integrity. The letter began with a complete timeline of Madison's criminal activities, supported by photographs and documented evidence I'd collected from her room. I detailed the mail theft, insurance fraud, identity theft, embezzlement from Dad's business, and the systematic drugging that had compromised my ability to make clear decisions about my future. But the letter also included information that would shock everyone, especially Madison. While researching her claims about our family's financial situation, I'd contacted the bank that held our grandmother's safety deposit box and learned about assets Madison had never discovered. Our grandmother had indeed left her engagement ring for safekeeping, but the ring Madison stole and pawned was a replica worth less than $200. The real ring, valued at approximately $50,000, remained safely in the deposit box, along with stock certificates and bonds worth an additional $75,000. These hidden assets had been designated specifically for my education, with instructions that they should remain secret until I graduated from college, or turned 25, whichever came first. Madison's crimes had been committed under false assumptions about our family's resources and her own cleverness in identifying valuable targets for theft. I also revealed that I'd been testing our family's loyalty for several months after noticing small discrepancies in my mail delivery and suspicious changes in Madison's lifestyle that didn't match her claimed employment income. The evidence I'd collected was the result of deliberate investigation rather than accidental discovery. The loan papers Madison expected me to sign were themselves part of an elaborate test I'd designed with help from Margaret Walsh, our family attorney. The loan company was fictional, created through legal channels to determine whether Madison would pressure me into signing fraudulent documents that would expose her willingness to commit additional crimes. Every signature Madison thought she needed from me was actually evidence of her intent to commit further fraud, documented by law enforcement and admissible in court proceedings. She had walked into a trap designed to reveal the full scope of her criminal enterprise while protecting potential victims from future schemes. But the letter's most devastating revelation concerned Derek and his associates. Working with federal investigators, I'd learned that Derek was already under surveillance for organized criminal activities, including money laundering, identity theft, and violence connected to illegal debt collection. Madison's association with him had unknowingly made her a federal informant whose conversations were being monitored by law enforcement. Every admission she'd made about her crimes had been recorded by federal agents, and Derek's presence in our family home had provided authorities with evidence of intimidation and threats that elevated her charges to federal felony levels. Madison thought she was manipulating me, but she'd actually been providing prosecutors with everything they needed to ensure lengthy prison sentences. I sealed copies of all evidence in separate envelopes addressed to Detective Williams' agent Torres Dr. Chen and Margaret Walsh, ensuring that multiple parties would have access to documentation regardless of what happened to my original letter. The redundancy would prevent Madison or Derek from destroying evidence or intimidating witnesses after learning about my investigation. At 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before Derek's artificial deadline, I walked downstairs carrying my suitcase and the letter that would change everything. Derek was pacing our living room like a predator, while Madison sat nervously checking her phone for messages from creditors expecting payment confirmation. Dad looked exhausted as he held the loan papers, and Mom was crying quietly on the couch in a way that suggested she'd finally realized the magnitude of what they'd been manipulated into attempting. The scene looked like a family in crisis, which was exactly what Madison had created through months of lies and criminal behavior. "I've made my decision," I announced, setting my suitcase by the front door. "I'm willing to sign the loan papers tonight, but I want everyone to understand the complete implications of what we're agreeing to as a family." Madison's relief was visible as she assumed her manipulation had succeeded. "I knew you'd make the right choice," she said, moving toward the coffee table where Dad had arranged the documents for my signature. "Family always comes through for each other when it really matters." But instead of reaching for a pen, I placed my letter on the coffee table and stepped back toward the door. "Before I sign anything, I want everyone to read this letter carefully. It contains information about our family's financial situation that will affect how we proceed tonight." Derek immediately objected to any delay in the signing process. "No more games or discussions. Madison needs those papers signed right now, or everyone in this house will face consequences that extend far beyond financial problems." I picked up my suitcase and opened our front door, feeling cool night air rush into the overheated tension of our living room. "The letter contains everything you need to know about Madison's activities and the real options available to our family. Read it carefully and call me when you're ready to discuss genuine solutions rather than criminal conspiracies." Madison jumped up from the couch, panic replacing her previous confidence. "Brianna, don't leave tonight. We can work through any problems you think exist, but running away won't solve the immediate crisis we're facing as a family." But I was already walking toward the taxi I'd called while upstairs, leaving behind a family that would spend the next few hours discovering the truth about Madison's criminal enterprise and their unwitting participation in federal crimes. The letter would provide them with clear evidence and legal guidance, but the choices they made about how to respond would determine whether our family could survive the consequences of Madison's betrayal. As the taxi pulled away from our house, I called Emma Rodriguez to confirm my arrival in Austin and Agent Torres to report that all evidence had been delivered and Madison's criminal activities were now fully documented for federal prosecution. The loan papers would remain unsigned, Derek's threats would be investigated by law enforcement, and Madison would finally face accountability for her choices. My phone began ringing almost immediately as my family discovered the contents of my letter, but I was already focused on the future rather than the past. The scholarship opportunities Madison had stolen could still be recovered, the hidden assets our grandmother had left would fund my education, and the criminal charges against my sister would ensure she faced justice for her crimes. By morning, Madison would be panicking as she realized the scope of what I'd discovered and documented. Dad would be driving around Dallas looking for me, not understanding that I was safe in Austin and protected by federal law enforcement. Mom would be crying in our living room, finally comprehending how thoroughly Madison had manipulated everyone who loved her. But justice was finally being served, and the family betrayal that had started with my birthday dinner would end with accountability consequences and the possibility of healing for everyone willing to acknowledge the truth about Madison's criminal behavior. The call from Mom came at 6:37 a.m., waking me from the first peaceful sleep I'd experienced in weeks. Her voice was shaking as she tried to explain the chaos that had erupted in our house after everyone finished reading my letter and examining the evidence I'd left behind. "Brianna, we found your letter around midnight, and we've been up all night trying to understand everything you documented about Madison's activities. Your father is driving around Dallas looking for you, and Madison locked herself in her bedroom after Derek left suddenly when he saw the evidence photographs." I sat up in Emma's guest bed feeling oddly calm, despite the emotional storm I'd unleashed by exposing the truth about my sister's criminal enterprise. How much of the letter did everyone read? Did Dad understand the parts about his business being compromised by Madison's embezzlement? Mom's voice cracked as she tried to maintain composure. "We read everything, sweetheart. The insurance fraud, the mail theft, the drugging, the stolen scholarship letters. Your father called Dr. Chen at midnight to warn him about the business irregularities, and they're meeting with attorneys this morning to assess the damage to their company. But Madison's reaction was what concerned me most. I need to know if she's admitted to any of the crimes, or if she's still trying to manipulate everyone into believing she's the victim in this situation." Mom was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Madison came downstairs around 2 a.m. demanding that we call you immediately and force you to return home. She claimed you'd fabricated all the evidence and threatened to hurt herself if we didn't make this situation disappear quickly. But when your father confronted her with the forged signatures and stolen letters, she couldn't explain how you could have manufactured documents that clearly showed her handwriting and personal information." The sound of sirens in the background of Mom's phone call made my stomach clench with anxiety. "What's happening there right now? Are those police sirens I'm hearing?" "Yes," Mom said quietly. Detective Williams and several other officers arrived about 20 minutes ago with search warrants for Madison's room and computer. They're collecting evidence related to the federal crimes you reported, and they have questions for everyone about how much we knew about Madison's activities. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as I realized the legal consequences were finally catching up with Madison's choices. Have the police arrested her yet, or is she still claiming innocence about everything? Detective Williams is interviewing Madison separately right now, Mom explained. But based on what we overheard, she's trying to blame Derek for pressuring her into criminal activities while positioning herself as another victim of his manipulation and threats. The attempt to shift blame didn't surprise me, but I hoped law enforcement had enough evidence to see through Madison's latest performance. What about Derek? Did he come back to the house after reading my letter, or did he disappear once he realized federal agents were investigating his activities? Mom's voice became even more worried as she described Derek's reaction. "He left immediately after seeing your evidence, and he seemed genuinely frightened about being connected to Madison's crimes. Before driving away, he told Madison that she was on her own, and he couldn't help her if federal investigators were involved in building cases against her." I realized Derek's abandonment had probably shattered Madison's confidence about manipulating her way out of legal consequences. Without his protection and influence, she was facing the reality of federal prosecution for crimes that carried serious prison sentences. But the call that really changed everything came from Dad around 9 a.m. when he finally stopped driving around Dallas and returned home to face the investigation. His voice sounded 20 years older as he tried to explain the scope of what law enforcement had discovered during their search of Madison's belongings. "Brianna, the police found evidence of criminal activities we never imagined Madison was capable of committing. She had detailed plans for staging accidents involving you personally, with the goal of collecting insurance money while potentially causing you serious physical harm." My blood ran cold as I realized how close Madison's criminal planning had come to involving violence against me directly. What kind of accidents was she planning, and how far had she progressed in implementing these schemes? Dad's voice was barely audible as he described what investigators had found. She had researched how to tamper with your car's brakes to cause crashes that would appear accidental. She had also planned to slip stronger drugs into your food to cause medical emergencies that would justify insurance claims for hospitalization and ongoing treatment costs. The revelation that Madison had been planning to physically harm me for financial gain crossed a line that transformed my anger into something much colder and more determined. She wasn't just a gambling addict who'd made poor financial decisions. She was a dangerous criminal who had targeted her own family for violence and exploitation. But Dad's next words provided the justice I'd been hoping for since discovering the scope of Madison's betrayal. The federal agents told us they have enough evidence to charge Madison with mail fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted assault. Derek is also being arrested today on charges related to organized criminal enterprise and intimidation of witnesses. I felt a deep sense of relief as the legal system finally intervened to hold Madison accountable for her choices. "Have Mom and you been charged with any crimes related to the college fund theft and forged signatures?" Dad was quiet for a moment before answering honestly. "The investigators said we could face charges for participating in the financial fraud, but they're treating us as victims of Madison's manipulation rather than willing conspirators. We'll need to cooperate fully with their investigation and provide testimony about how she convinced us to access your college fund through forged documents. The distinction between victims and criminals would depend on how convincingly my parents could demonstrate they'd been manipulated rather than knowingly participating in fraud. But given Madison's history of lying and emotional manipulation, I believed investigators would recognize the pattern of behavior that had deceived our entire family." Emma found me sitting in her kitchen around noon, staring at my phone as updates continued arriving from Dallas. Madison had been formally arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes. Derek was in custody pending investigation of his criminal enterprise, and my parents were cooperating with prosecutors while facing potential charges of their own. "How are you feeling about everything that's happening?" Emma asked, sitting across from me with coffee and a concerned expression that reminded me why she'd been such a good friend throughout college. I thought about her question carefully before answering. "I feel sad that my family fell apart, but I also feel relieved that Madison finally has to face consequences for her choices. She's been manipulating and hurting people for years while positioning herself as a victim deserving rescue and support." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who cause the most damage, because we trust them not to hurt us deliberately. It takes courage to hold them accountable when their behavior crosses lines that can't be uncrossed. But the call that surprised me most came from Northwestern University that afternoon. Dr. Sarah Martinez from their financial aid office had received my voicemail about the stolen scholarship letter and wanted to discuss emergency options for accepting their full tuition offer despite the delayed response. "Ms. Johnson," she said warmly, "we've reviewed your academic record and the circumstances you described regarding mail theft and family fraud. While our normal deadlines have passed, we're prepared to offer you immediate admission with full scholarship funding starting in the spring semester if you're still interested in attending Northwestern. The opportunity Madison thought she'd destroyed forever was being restored through the very evidence of her crimes that I'd used to expose her criminal behavior. Justice wasn't just being served through criminal prosecution, it was also providing me with the educational future she'd tried to steal. But Dr. Martinez had one additional piece of news that made the offer even more meaningful. We've also been contacted by several other universities who learned about your situation through professional networks. You have multiple options for full scholarship funding at prestigious institutions, which means you can choose the program that best fits your academic and career goals. As evening approached, I realized Madison's criminal enterprise had collapsed completely within 24 hours of my letter revealing the truth about her activities. Federal agents had gathered enough evidence for serious charges. Derek's criminal network was being dismantled, and my parents were finally free from the manipulation that had nearly destroyed our family's financial stability. The birthday dinner that had started with betrayal and ultimatums was ending with justice, accountability, and the restoration of opportunities Madison thought she'd permanently destroyed. Sometimes the people who try to destroy your future end up providing exactly the evidence needed to build something even better than what they attempted to take away. 6 months after that devastating birthday dinner, I stood in the law library at Northwestern University, surrounded by casebooks and legal journals that represented the future Madison had tried to steal from me. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting warm light across pages of constitutional law that would help me build a career dedicated to protecting victims of family financial abuse. The letter on my desk was from the Cook County District Attorney's Office, providing final updates on Madison's sentencing. She had pleaded guilty to 14 federal charges, including mail fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, embezzlement conspiracy, and attempted assault. The plea agreement resulted in a sentence of 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, along with restitution orders totaling over $200,000. Derek's criminal enterprise had been completely dismantled, with 12 associates arrested across 4 states for organized fraud, money laundering, and violent debt collection. His sentence of 8 years in federal prison reflected the serious nature of crimes that had victimized dozens of families across the region. But the justice that mattered most to me was the accountability Madison finally faced for choices that had nearly destroyed multiple innocent people's lives. Federal investigators had uncovered evidence of crimes spanning 3 years and involving over 50 victims whose identities she'd stolen or whose mail she'd intercepted for fraudulent purposes. Dad's business had survived the investigation, but barely. Dr. Chen's quick response to my warning had prevented further embezzlement, and their cooperation with federal investigators helped prosecutors understand how Madison had manipulated family access to compromise business accounts. The partnership remained intact, strengthened by shared adversity and renewed commitment to financial transparency. Mom had started attending therapy sessions specifically designed for family members of addicts and criminals, learning to recognize manipulation techniques and establish healthy boundaries that would prevent future exploitation. Her therapist helped her understand that loving Madison didn't require enabling her destructive behavior or sacrificing other family members' well-being for her temporary comfort. The most meaningful change was the letter I received from Mom 3 months after Madison's sentencing. She had written to apologize for the choices she and Dad made on that terrible birthday evening, acknowledging that fear and manipulation had led them to betray my trust in ways that could have permanently damaged our relationship. We realize now that we allowed Madison to create a crisis atmosphere that prevented us from thinking clearly about the legal and ethical implications of what she was asking us to do. Stealing your college fund and demanding that you co-sign fraudulent loan papers was wrong, regardless of the pressure we felt to solve Madison's problems quickly. Mom's letter also revealed important family history that helped explain Madison's sense of entitlement and willingness to exploit others for personal gain. She had been exhibiting manipulative behavior since childhood, but our family had consistently made excuses for her actions rather than holding her accountable for the consequences of her choices. Looking back, we can see a pattern of behavior where Madison would create emergencies that required other people's sacrifices to resolve, then use emotional manipulation to avoid personal responsibility for the problems she'd created. We enabled this pattern by prioritizing short-term peace over long-term accountability. But the letter that surprised me most came from Madison herself, written from federal prison after 6 months of incarceration and mandatory counseling for gambling addiction and antisocial behavior. Her words showed signs of genuine recognition rather than the calculated manipulation that had characterized most of our previous conversations. I spent months in prison trying to convince myself that everyone else was responsible for the situation I'm facing. But the therapy programs here have helped me understand how my choices systematically hurt people who loved me. I used your trust and our family's love as weapons to enable criminal behavior that could have resulted in serious physical harm to you personally. Madison's letter didn't ask for forgiveness or promise immediate change, which actually made it more credible than her previous attempts at emotional manipulation. Instead, she acknowledged specific crimes and their impact on victims, while taking responsibility for choices that had seemed justified to her at the time, but now appeared clearly criminal and selfish. The hardest part of accepting responsibility is recognizing that my gambling addiction doesn't excuse the deliberate choices I made to hurt innocent people for financial gain. I chose to steal your mail-forged signatures, drug your coffee, and plan accidents that could have killed you. Those weren't desperate mistakes made under pressure. They were calculated criminal acts that reflected my willingness to destroy other people's lives for my own temporary benefit. But perhaps the most important development was the victim advocacy nonprofit Emma and I had established using funds recovered from Madison's criminal activities. The organization provided legal assistance and emotional support for family members victimized by financial fraud, helping them navigate complex legal processes while rebuilding their lives after betrayal by people they trusted. Our first major success involved helping a family in Houston whose teenage daughter had been stealing mail and committing identity theft to fund a shopping addiction her parents had never suspected. Using lessons learned from Madison's case, we helped the family document evidence of criminal activity while ensuring their daughter faced appropriate legal consequences rather than continued enabling. The scholarship fund established with our grandmother's real engagement ring had already assisted 12 students whose educational opportunities were threatened by family financial fraud. Each scholarship recipient was required to complete coursework in financial literacy and victim advocacy, ensuring they understood both the legal protections available and their responsibility to help other people facing similar challenges. The work felt meaningful in ways that transformed my anger about Madison's betrayal into something constructive and forward-looking. Every family we helped recover from financial fraud represented a small victory against the kind of manipulation that had nearly destroyed my own future. But the moment that brought everything full circle occurred during my second semester at Northwestern, when I received a call from Detective Williams about a case involving family financial fraud that shared disturbing similarities to Madison's criminal pattern. A 20-year-old college student in Dallas had discovered that her sister was stealing her mail and using forged signatures to access her college fund. The investigation revealed that Madison had been coaching other inmates in federal prison about techniques for family financial fraud, essentially running a criminal education program from her prison cell. Federal authorities were expanding their investigation to include additional charges related to conspiracy and ongoing criminal enterprise. Would you be willing to testify about your experience with Madison's crimes if it helps prosecutors build cases against the additional victims she's been coaching? Detective Williams asked. Your testimony could prevent other families from experiencing the kind of betrayal that nearly destroyed your educational future. I agreed immediately, recognizing that Madison was still choosing to hurt innocent people, even while incarcerated for previous crimes. Some people learn from consequences and make better choices, while others simply become more sophisticated in their methods of exploitation and manipulation. The testimony I provided helped secure additional charges against Madison that extended her prison sentence and placed her in a facility with more restrictive communication privileges. But more importantly, it helped prosecutors understand the psychological patterns that enabled family financial fraud and develop prevention strategies for protecting potential victims. As I finished my first year at Northwestern with grades that qualified me for law review and judicial internships, I realized Madison's attempt to destroy my future had actually clarified my sense of purpose and strengthened my commitment to justice for victims of family betrayal. The scholarship opportunities she'd stolen had been replaced by even better offers, and the criminal evidence she'd provided had helped law enforcement protect dozens of other potential victims. The letter I wrote to my parents on the first anniversary of that terrible birthday dinner reflected the growth and healing our family had experienced through accountability rather than enablement. We had learned that loving someone doesn't require tolerating their willingness to hurt innocent people, and that genuine family support sometimes means refusing to participate in behavior that ultimately destroys the person you're trying to help. Madison's choices had revealed fundamental truths about justice, accountability, and the difference between helping someone and enabling their capacity to harm others. The family that emerged from her criminal prosecution was smaller, but healthier, built on honesty rather than manipulation and boundaries rather than exploitation. Sometimes the people we love most force us to choose between our loyalty to them and our integrity toward everyone else they're willing to hurt. Madison taught me that real love requires the courage to hold people accountable for their choices, even when the consequences are painful for everyone involved. The life lesson that emerged from her betrayal was simple but profound. Sometimes loving someone means refusing to enable their destruction, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Justice isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary for genuine healing and growth to occur. Today, as I prepare for legal internships that will help me build a career protecting victims of financial fraud, I'm grateful for the strength Madison's betrayal forced me to discover within myself. She tried to steal my future, but she actually helped me find my calling and my purpose in ways I never could have imagined. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted completely? How did you find the courage to choose justice over family loyalty when the people you loved were asking you to enable behavior that hurt innocent victims? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if Madison's story helped you understand the difference between helping someone and enabling their capacity to harm others. Subscribe for more stories about choosing accountability over comfortable lies, and share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to stand up for what's right, even when it costs them relationships they valued. Thank you for listening to my story, And I hope it helps you recognize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction, even when they're family.